So while you're watching a modern TV series, you always get a sense of security. And why is that, you ask? Well, you can always lean on the fact that you know the main character won't die. The only time you have to even really consider death as an option for them would be maybe in the last episode or last season. Take Dexter for an example. You're pretty safe betting that he won't die or be arrested. Or Breaking Bad, it wouldn't make sense for Walter White to die in season 4. Okay, so why am I telling you this? Well, Ned Stark. Man, season 1 of Game of Thrones was such an exciting experience. You're following this badass, honorable, but still human character. And then he dies in the final episode? What the hell? I was so surprised by this that I literally thought he didn't die. While watching the next episode, I was literally just waiting for him to turn up alive or hidden away in some prison cell. I really thought they couldn't do that. I was so used to the main character being invincible that I forgot writers can just off someone like that. Every scene, every line of dialogue, every single frame felt like it carried the weight of something bigger. That's the kind of storytelling we're dealing with here. Nobody is safe whether you're good or bad. And it wasn't just the plot, it was the characters. They felt real in a way that's very rare for TV. They weren't just good or bad, they were messy, complicated, and human. Look at Jaime Lannister, for example. He starts out as this smug, arrogant prick who pushes a kid out of a window. You hate him, but then as the seasons go on, you start to see his layers, his struggles, his regrets. By the time we get to his redemption arc, you're rooting for the same guy who you wanted dead in season 1. That's what this show did. It made you feel something for everyone, even the villains. Well, I mean, except for Joffrey, of course, who we all know could burn in hell. Remember the Red Wedding? It's so surprising that there's literally hundreds of videos of people filming their unsuspected friends watching it. It wasn't just the violence or betrayal, it was the fact that deep down it made sense. Robb Stark broke the rules, he ignored the political realities of his world, and he paid the price. It was brutal, but it was also inevitable. And that's what made it so powerful. It wasn't just a shock for the sake of shock, it was earned. That's what made Game of Thrones special. It respected its audience, it trusted us to keep up, to pay attention, to connect the dots. It rewarded us for investing in the story, and because of that, we trusted, yes, trusted the writers to make a good ending. We believed that every decision, every plot twist, and every death had a purpose, and for a long time they earned that trust. Westeros felt alive in a way that very few fictional worlds do. It wasn't just a backdrop for the story, it was a character in its own right. The history, the geography, the culture, it all felt real. You could tell that this was a world with layers, a world that existed long before the story started and would continue long after it ended. From the icy, desolate lands beyond the wall to the sun-soaked streets of Dorne, every location felt distinct, like it had its own personality, its own culture, and actually felt like a country. Call me a sexist if you want, but I've always thought that female characters in series and movies were very boring, very uninteresting, which I still think is mostly true in modern films. It just kind of feels like they're just there as a plot device and to act as further motivation to the male characters rather than having their own personality, but Daenerys Targaryen single-handedly changed that for me. Although Daenerys is not the only well-written female character in Game of Thrones, of course. For once, a female character is actually cool, and she's strong for a reason that doesn't feel forced, unlike Rey from Star Wars, for example. She beat a Sith apprentice in a fight after training for what, like 10 days? It doesn't make sense, but Daenerys Targaryen does. There was this unspoken agreement between the show and its fans. If we paid attention, if we cared enough to notice the small details, we would be rewarded. And for the longest time, we were. Look at the build-up for the Battle of the Bastards. That wasn't just a fight, it was the culmination of years of storytelling. Jon Snow wasn't just fighting for his life, he was fighting for his family, for his home, for everything the Stark stood for. And Ramsay Bolton wasn't just a villain, he was a monster who had to be stopped. By the time the battle happened, the stakes felt enormous. You weren't just watching, it felt like you were in it. But with that level of greatness comes expectation, and when a show sets the bar as high as Game of Thrones did, it has to stick the landing, because the higher the climb, the harder the fall, of course. And when Game of Thrones fell, it wasn't just a stumble, it was a complete collapse. It's funny how hindsight works, isn't it? Looking back, the cracks in Game of Thrones were there for a while. We just didn't want to see them. We were so caught up in the dragons and the scheming that we ignored the warning signs. And let's be real, there were plenty of them. Do you remember how careful the show used to be about time and distance? If a character was traveling from Winterfell to King's Landing, you knew it was going to take a while. The journey wasn't just a matter of geography, it was a part of the story. It gave characters time to grow, to reflect, to interact with each other in ways that made the relationships feel real. But by the time we got to season 7, it was like the showrunners discovered fast travel. Suddenly, characters were zipping around Westeros like they were in some medieval version of The Amazing Race. One minute Jon's in Winterfell, the next he's in Dragonstone. No big deal. It wasn't only the travel though. It was everything. Storylines that used to take seasons to unfold were now being crammed into a couple of episodes. Take Arya's whole assassin arc, for example. Remember how badass it was when she trained with the Faceless Men? That had so much potential and then nothing. It just fizzled out. She left Braavos, went home, and we all kind of forgot it happened. What was the point of all that buildup if it wasn't going to lead to something meaningful? The same goes for Dorne, which this one actually really pissed me off. In the books, Dorne is this fascinating, politically charged place with its own rich history and unique culture, but on the show it was reduced to a bad soap opera. Ellaria Sand and her daughters were supposed to be these dangerous, vengeful women, but they came off as cartoon villains and they were gone, just gone. They died way too fast and I barely remember any of their characters. No payoff, no closure, nothing. Jon Snow was the heart of the show, the brooding, noble underdog who had main character energy written all over him. When he died at the end of season 5, it was devastating, but when he came back in season 6, it was supposed to be this massive game-changing moment, except it wasn't. Sure, he came back to life, but it didn't really mean anything. It didn't change him, it didn't alter his perspective or make him question his purpose. He just went back to being the same old Jon, like nothing had happened. And we were supposed to be okay with that? I mean, personally, I was kind of fine with it. It's still made for great TV, but surely you can start to see the cracks in the plot start to form around here. Then there was Tyrion, the man who used to be the smartest, wittiest character in the room, suddenly couldn't outthink a toddler. This is the same guy who orchestrated the defense of King's Landing with Wildfire, who played a political game like a pro, and by season 7, he's out here giving Daenerys the worst advice imaginable. He keeps on making mistakes over and over, like trusting Cersei. Genuinely, an idiot wouldn't trust Cersei. But all said and done, all the things so far when it comes down to it weren't exactly that bad. Most of it stayed entertaining and true to the original show. I never really felt betrayed, but it did suck that they were being so messy and careless about the plot. But literally nothing could prepare me for the absolute garbage season we would be presented next. I don't even know where to begin with season 8. It's like the writers looked at everything we loved about the show, all the intricate storytelling, the careful built character arcs, the weight of every decision, and said, nah, let's just blow it all up. And they did blow it all up. Spectacularly. Catastrophically. It wasn't just bad, it was, like, insulting. And the biggest betrayal, of course, is the pacing. Oh my god, the pacing is horrible. We'd spent 7 seasons watching the story unfold slowly, deliberately and methodically. Every decision, every death, every alliance, it all felt like it had weight because the show took time to make it feel earned. But in season 8, forget it. Everything was so on fast forward. People weren't just traveling across Westeros in minutes, they were making massive life-altering decisions with no build-up, no justification and no emotional payoff. Just take Daenerys, for example. Her descent into madness should have been one of the most compelling arcs in the entire series. It should have been tragic, devastating, and most importantly, it should have been earned, like all the other life-altering decisions in the series. But instead, it felt like the writers just flipped the switch. One minute she's the breaker of chains, the champion of justice, the woman who freed millions of slaves. The next she's burning innocent civilians alive because her nephew wouldn't kiss her. I mean, like what? Let's just unpack that for a second. For 7 seasons, Daenerys was portrayed as a complex, morally grey character. Yeah, she had a violent streak, but she also genuinely wanted to make the world a better place. Her biggest internal conflict was always this struggle between mercy and destruction. And the hints were there, of course they were, that she could go full Mad Queen if pushed far enough. But the whole point of her arc was that it was a struggle, it was supposed to be gradual. Why the fuck would they make it happen so sudden? Listen man, I know they just wanted to end the whole series, but come on man, this is literally what the entire series was building up to ever since she got her dragons. There was no descent, no internal conflict, no real build-up, she just snapped. 2 episodes. 2 episodes, that's all it took. I feel like maybe before she was like 50% there to going crazy, but she wasn't 95%. All this, and I haven't even talked about the Night King yet. This guy had been built up as the ultimate big bad for the entire series. He was Steph incarnate, the one thing that could unite all of Westeros because nothing else mattered if he wasn't stopped. And what do? They kill him in one episode, with one stab, by a character who, let's be honest, had no business being the one to take him out. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't hate Arya. She's one of my liked characters. But her killing the Night King made no sense. She had no personal connection to him, she didn't even know he existed until a season ago. If anyone was going to take him down, it should have been Jon or Bran or Daenerys. Fucking Sam Tarly should have done it. Someone who had been a part of his fight since the beginning. I get that maybe they wanted her whole training arc to be a product of something, but this just wasn't it. Make her kill the Mountain or, I don't know, Cersei. And it wasn't just who killed him, it was how. The battle was supposed to be this, epic high-stakes confrontation between the living and the dead. And sure, it looked cool, but there was no emotional weight. No, real tension. The Night King just dies. No explanation, no deeper meaning, no nothing. It was the biggest anticlimax in TV history. Speaking of anticlimaxes, let's talk about Cersei and Jaime. Cersei was one of the greatest villains in television history. She was cunning, ruthless, and willing to do whatever it took to hold on to power. And how does she go out? Crying in a basement, crushed by some rocks. That's it. No epic showdown, no poetic justice, no meaningful resolution, just rubble. Jaime Lannister, who had one of the best redemption arcs in the entire series, the man who went from being one of the most hated characters to one of the most beloved, he throws it all away in the final episodes. For what? To run back to Cersei, the woman who had manipulated him and abused him his entire life? It was like everything we'd watched him go through, losing his hand, leaving Cersei, becoming a better person, meant absolutely nothing, just a weak poetic statement. Again, I get what they were going for, but if they were going to do this, they should have done it right. The only way they could have done that was by actually take their time. The makers were given time, why couldn't they just stretch the series out a tiny bit longer? I don't think it needed to be perfect, they just needed to not make it rushed. And then there's also Bran, the kid who spent most of the series sitting around saying cryptic things like "I'm not really Bran anymore." And somehow this guy ends up as king, the guy who literally did nothing during the Battle of Winterfell. I mean, sure, he can see the past and the future, but when has that ever really been useful except for a few times during the whole White Walker War thing? He couldn't even warn anyone about the dragons attacking King's Landing. They could have done a whole Bran being suspicious of Daenerys thing. Listen, I get it, man, he's smart now, all monk-like and philosophical, but he just isn't king material. I just overall don't like Bran all that much. His arc was never really entertaining for me. And it's the way they make him king. It's not even a debate. Usually they would stretch something like this out for episodes. Tyrion just says Bran should be king and everyone's like, yeah. No arguments, no drama, no tension. This is Game of Thrones. The entire show was built on political intrigue and power struggles. And they resolved the question of who should rule Westeros in 5 minutes with a shrug. I also don't like how they did nothing with Jon Snow, absolutely nothing. He kills Daenerys, gets banished to the Night's Watch, and that's it. That's the end. No prophecy fulfilled, no payoff, no resolution, just nothing. But as I said before, the worst part of all of this is it didn't really have to be this way. HBO offered the showrunners more time, more episodes, more seasons, whatever they needed to finish the story properly, but they turned it down. They wanted to move on to other projects, so they rushed through the final season like it was an inconvenience. And yeah, you could really feel it. You could feel the lack of care, the lack of passion, the lack of respect for the story and the fans. It wasn't just a bad ending, it was a betrayal of everything that made Game of Thrones great in the first place. When it comes to a good final, Breaking Bad is the gold standard. It's the show that knew exactly when to stop, exactly how to wrap up its story, and exactly how to respect its audience's investment. And honestly, watching it again after the train wreck of Game of Thrones just makes me even angrier, because it's proof that a great ending isn't just possible, it's necessary. It's the thing that cements a show's legacy. And where Game of Thrones fumbled the bag so hard it became a meme, Breaking Bad stuck the landing like it was born to do it. I mean, we could start with the pacing. Breaking Bad didn't rush to the finish line, it built toward it steadily and deliberately. From the moment Walter White said, "I'm the one who knocks," you could feel the story hurting toward its inevitable conclusion. But it never felt like it was speeding out of control. Every episode of the final season was packed with tension and with purpose. Each move Walter made felt like it carried the weight of everything he had done up until that point. And when the series finale, Felina, finally came, it wasn't just an episode, it was an event. And of course, when we compare that to Game of Thrones, where the final season felt like someone accidentally hit the 2x speed button, huge game-changing events were crammed into single episodes, characters made monumental decisions without zero build-up, and instead of feeling like the culmination of everything we watched for 7 seasons, it felt like a rushed conclusion to a story with writers that didn't want to tell anymore. Look at Walter White. He's one of the most morally complex characters in television history. A mild-mannered chemistry teacher who slowly transforms into a ruthless drug kingpin. It's a journey that's as horrifying as it is fascinating. And by the time we get to the finale, the show doesn't shy away from the consequences of his actions. Walter loses everything: his family, his money, his reputation, but he also gets a chance at redemption. He goes out on his own terms, taking down his enemies and securing his legacy in the only way he knows how. And even though at that point I sort of had a love-hate relationship with Walter, while he lays on the floor at the end, I couldn't help but feel like I forgave him. Now compare that to Jon Snow. Jon was supposed to be the hero of Game of Thrones, the prince that was promised, the man who would save Westeros from the Night King, from Daenerys, from everything, but by the time the show ended, he felt like an afterthought. He killed Daenerys, sure, but it didn't feel like a moment of triumph or tragedy. It felt kind of empty, and they banished him to the Night Watch, like the writers didn't know what else to do with him. And what about Daenerys? Walter White's downfall was tragic, but it was also earned. You could trace every step of his journey and see exactly how he got there. With Daenerys, her turn to the Mad Queen felt like it came out of nowhere. Yes, there were hints, but the show didn't do the work that make her descent feel believable. It wasn't a tragic arc, it was a lazy one. Then there's the Night King. You want to talk about wasted potential? Imagine if Breaking Bad had built up Gus Fring as the ultimate villain only to have him killed off in the middle of the final season by some random side character as well. That's what Game of Thrones did. The Night King was supposed to be the ultimate threat, the thing that united everyone in Westeros, and they took him out in one stab. With no deeper meaning as well, no emotional payoff. Breaking Bad, on the other hand, gave its villains the endings they deserve. Gus Fring's death was iconic. It was gruesome, shocking, and perfectly fitting for a character who thrived on control. And in the finale, Jack and his gang don't just die, they're taken down in a way that's directly tied to Walter's ingenuity and ruthlessness. Every death in Breaking Bad felt like it mattered. In Game of Thrones, they just felt like checkboxes. Towards the end of Game of Thrones, it really just felt like they were rushing to kill the characters people wanted to die. But by doing so, they took exactly that from us. Daenerys didn't really ever die for me, because the way she was killed didn't feel real at all. Even the secondary characters in Breaking Bad got the endings they deserved. Jesse Pinkman's escape was one of the most satisfying moments in the entire series. After everything he'd been through, after all the trauma, all the pain, he finally got a chance at freedom. It was hopeful, but it didn't feel cheap or unearned. It was the perfect way to say goodbye to a character who had suffered so much. The fallout from the finale was like watching a kingdom crumble overnight. One moment, Game of Thrones was untouchable. It was the king of TV, breaking records, winning awards. The next, it was the punchline of every joke on the internet. And if there's one thing the internet loves, it's a good roast. Yeah, the immediate backlash was intense. Fans were pissed, and they weren't shy about letting the world know. Social media exploded with memes, rants, and petitions. So remember that infamous petition to remake Season 8? Over 1 million people signed it. 1 million. Sure, it was never going to happen, but the sheer numbers showed just how betrayed people felt. This wasn't just disappointment, it was a full-blown rebellion. The thing is, the final didn't just ruin Season 8, it tarnished the entire legacy of the show. For years, Game of Thrones was hailed as the pinnacle of modern television. It wasn't just a fantasy show, it was the fantasy show, and critics loved it, fans worshipped it. It was the kind of series that could turn casual viewers into hardcore theorists. But after the finale, it became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how even the mightiest can fall. Even the actors seemed to sense the change. Watching interviews from before and after the finale is kind of awkward. You can particularly see the moment they realized fans weren't happy. Emilia Clarke, who played Daenerys, gave some of the most diplomatic, yeah, it's fine, I guess, responses I've ever seen. And Peter Dinklage, he basically said, yeah, let's not talk about it. When your cast doesn't even want to defend the ending, you know you've got a problem. Despite all the backlash though, there are still people who defend the finale. They'll say things like it wasn't that bad, or the show was always about subverting expectations. And look, I get it, if you like the ending, more power to you. Art is subjective after all, but for the rest of us, it's hard to look past the rushed storytelling and wasted potential. It's not just about subverting expectations, it's about doing it in a way that makes sense, and the finale just didn't do that. And yet, somehow, despite all of this, there's still hope, because as much as the finale hurt, Game of Thrones isn't entirely dead. Spin-offs like House of the Dragon have shown that there still is life in the franchise, and maybe, just maybe, these spin-offs can help us look back to the original series with a little bit more forgiveness. Maybe they can soften the blowout of the finale. I mean, to be fair, other franchises have managed to pull off something similar. Look at Star Wars. After the backlash of the sequels trilogy, fans thought the franchise was done for, but then Disney released The Mandalorian and reunited some of the magic. Sure, it didn't erase the missteps of the past, but it gave fans something to love again. At least for a while. Let's be honest, the last season of The Mandalorian was kind of mid. Maybe Game of Thrones can do the same though. Which brings us to the final question. Can Game of Thrones ever truly redeem itself? It's tempting to say no, to look at the mess of Season 8 and write off the entire franchise, but if there's one thing Game of Thrones taught us, it's that stories are never truly over. There's always another twist, another chapter, another chance to get it right. And hey, if you've made it this far, you probably care as much as I do, so why not stick around, like the video, maybe subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments. Did the finale ruin the show for you? Or are you holding out hope for redemption? Either way, thanks for watching.